What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the MG YouTube channel. So I'm going to talk to you guys about Tesla's Robotaxi expansion today, kind of what's happened over the course of the past couple of weeks with the expansion. I'm not going to shoot this video in FSD today because, well, I got the trailer connected to the Cybertruck, and my son is in here cutting, getting some batteries, some DeWalt batteries. We have gas mowers, but we're working on converting over to like fully EV, or well, not, I guess, an electric vehicle. Electric mower. So we have the DeWalt mowers. We actually have two of the DeWalt mowers now that are battery operated. This is actually one of our elite properties here. But yeah, the boys are here mowing some grass, teaching them some work ethic. So I think it's extremely important to, teach your kids work ethic and keep them busy, keep them working. And yeah, because if not, then they grow up not knowing how to do anything. They think everything just comes for free and whatnot. And it's really cool, like, already seeing, like, how much development and how, like, they're able to do so many things that, like, some adults can't even do. And, like, some of my kids are, like, 6 years old, and they can do some things that, like, adults can't even do. So, I mean, that's just pretty remarkable. But let's go ahead and jump into the video. Just kind of give you a little bit of backstory of, like, some of the things that we have going on. I'll give you a little bit of behind the scenes and, like, there's the different business operations that we have going on. And also the kids, like, they'll mow and stuff like this, and it kind of helps me, like, be able to do things like shoot this video. And I have other business things that have to do with, like, elite automation and, in meetings with customers and engineering meetings with, our employees and vendors and stuff like that. So I have a lot going on in a day. And then on top of that, we're trying to, scale our properties and buy more properties and whatnot. So, yeah, overall just have a lot going on. So, Robotaxi. We got some really big news over the past, like, week. They opened up in the California area, and they opened up a huge, massive area, much bigger than Waymo. And I'm going to get into some, like, pros and cons about these two different things. I'm going to kind of talk about the pros, then I'm going to talk about, like, the negatives. Because I like to not just look at things as, like, just the bull and say, here's all the good things. I am a Tesla bull. I'm a Tesla investor. And, I have a ton of faith that over the next couple years that they're going to be able to do huge things. But there are some important things that people need to watch out for and be careful of, because if you're just too bullish, you won't even see some of the negative side of things. And we'll get into some of that. And some of my experience in the line of work that I do in robotics and automation, and project management, project deployment, it gives me insights to the way that some businesses operate as far as, like, marketing and stuff like that goes. And so I'll kind of, like, get into how that, ties in with the Robotaxi and whatnot. So they have expanded in California, over in is it San Jose? You got to really get on my X and check out, like, if you want true data, because, like, my memory's shit. And basically, yeah, I don't remember hardly anything. But, yeah, so, we're over here in California. We have the whole Bay Area, basically. And, I mean, it's huge. However, I guess, hold on, before I get into that, let's start going to the negatives. Now, the next big thing that's happened over the weekend, basically, the Robotaxi area in Austin was expanded, which doubled the size of Austin's area that they're covering. So, which one's more important, California or Austin? Well, Austin has something that is more significant about it. And it's the fact that they're scaling with no driver in the car, which is really something that I kind of, really don't expect or would not expect. Even though they'd launched Robotaxi pretty much with no driver anyway in Austin, which was pretty remarkable, right? But they're now scaling and growing that Geofence area with maybe some validation from some of the vehicles and maybe some manual driving by their employees and stuff like that. But they're not having to launch new Geofence areas, like, with drivers. So I think one thing that we can definitively take away from this expansion that we got over the past couple of weeks is that the areas where Tesla pulls out their drivers whenever they go to expand, they're not going to have an issue with having a driver versus not having a driver, unless they're expanding into like another state or potentially another city that has some type of different regulations. So one thing to keep in mind with the regulations is some regulations could be statewide regulations, and there could also be like citywide, ordinances, regulations that don't allow for autonomous vehicles. Now, citywide is probably going to be a lot less, especially your smaller cities, because I don't even think that they are thinking forwardly ahead enough to think that we need to even make a law or some type of ordinance against autonomous vehicles. So, like, if you go to like some small little country town, like there's not going to be any ordinances on autonomous vehicles at all. If anything, it's going to be state level. So like that's going to be one of the big things to like navigate around. And there's been news that like I think it's the governor of Florida or it's the transportation department of Florida, not governor, of Florida is very pro autonomy, right? They made basically a statement that said, "Come to Florida if you're like an AI Robotaxi startup. We're here to facilitate your business." Okay, so with Florida being super inviting, I know for a fact that the state of Texas and the state of California are very open to robotaxi autonomous vehicles. And with that being said, Tesla, unless there's a city ordinance, which even some of the states can override some of the city ordinance, and they're even in discussion for the United States to basically come in and have a blanket autonomous protocol that even states can't modify, and cities can't modify. So basically, whatever the United States comes up with their structure on what an autonomous vehicle looks like and what you got to do to get regulatory approval, Tesla will have to follow that. Every autonomous vehicle company will have to follow that, and they can force the states and cities to abide by that, meaning that they will not let the state or city have their own independent ordinances, which would be a very, very big deal. And it could be a very, very big deal in the positive way or the negative way, because if it's something where it's very tangible of like, you need so many miles without interventions, you need so many blah, 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 right? You have these different metrics that you need to make sure that you hit, how many miles without incidences, meaning maybe, and how many miles without like collisions, right? How many miles without, collisions that caused injury? How many miles without collisions for death? You know what I mean? So, obviously like this is something we have to look at, and things like that are going to happen at some point in time. It's inevitable. But at some point, I think once things are good enough, individuals getting in the car using the service are going to take on the liability. It just has to become so good that it's like so negligible for it to happen in a vehicle that you're like, maybe 100 times safer than a human driver, So at that point in time, then I think the government will allow, like Tesla to shift the liability to the rider, which is a kind of a completely different topic, and I don't really want to get into that because liability and being able to offer the service is two different things. So whenever they launched the Robotaxi in LA, they did so with drivers in the car. So they're still performing the Robotaxi service. It's still kind of one of those limited. It's still kind of one of those limited service type of things. Only invite individuals are allowed to ride in the Robotaxi, but it's getting basically the service active, rolling, and hopefully Tesla will soon show a revenue line on their balance sheet from Robotaxi. And they're required to after it becomes a significant amount enough revenue. However, at these small numbers of revenue, like they don't have to share it. They can kind of just tuck it away in like some other like revenue stream. But I want to see it as a line, so that way we can start tracking that line as a metric quarter over quarter. Now, again, like these are just quarter over quarter, short term investment type of things. You know, I am a long term investor. However, whenever I'm looking at Tesla as an investor, I have other investments that I'm also putting my money into. And so if if Tesla if Tesla's going to take 2 years before it makes a movement, because you know the way they're launching, like their narrative, like overall the sentiment around the stock, if they're not doing something to push the sentiment of the stock, then for 2 years that money could just sit idle and not make any money. Whereas I have like other things like in properties that I could invest into, and I gotta have properties that I could invest into, and basically have that money start cash flowing so that I could essentially have even more money to invest in that couple of years. So that's something that as an investor you have to balance, and that's just like one potential thing. There's other stocks that I'm invested into that I think are going to be big players, and I could diversify my money into some of those other things where I'm very heavy Tesla, but you have great investments like like Meta, AMD, Google, like pretty much all the AI plays, all the energy storage plays. These are all like pretty good bets, especially if you're diversified pretty well across them, or diversified in a way that you feel the company is going to do the best. They are the investments of our lifetime. This is like people that invested in some of the internet things that were successful. People who invested in Amazon and Facebook in the very beginning, like people became millionaires just investing small amounts of money by buying and holding money for a really long time. So like that's just kind of a sentiment thing. So I kind of just want to get into how that sentiment ties into the Robotaxi and the launch and everything like that. So, obviously, like Tesla's a stock that just has major negative pressure, right? Every headline is a negative headline, no matter how like positive the thing is they do. They launch in LA, and the negative headline is, oh, Tesla launches Robotaxi, but it's not autonomous. It's has to be manned by human because it's incapable of, whatever, right? And it's just a regulatory thing. Or they'll say like something along the lines of Tesla is denied the ability to have autonomous vehicles in California, right? They'll have these types of headlines where it's like you have to look at like the raw data, right? You have to not look at my opinion, not look at the any other bull's opinion, any other bear's opinion, but you have to look at the data that we're giving and say, what is going on here? What is the story? Not necessarily that's just being told by the bears and the bulls, but how are things like actually technologically playing out? So I guess it's like technically not the story, right? How are things technologically playing out versus my story and somebody else's story? But kind of lost my train of thought. Da, da, da. Oh, but so like what they're actually doing. So since they just launched in LA, the fact that they made that launch happen and they went ahead and did it with drivers in the car, it shows forward progress, right? So what are a couple things that you can get by launching in a new city and having drivers in the car? Okay, well, first of all, you can show that you're generating revenue because now you're taking paid rides. I'm not sure if those paid rides are flexible pricing or if they're doing like the 420 or the 690 pricing for fun. I think they probably just went to flexible pricing directly in LA. Probably because they want to make more money. Now they might have kept it lower and kind of did the ramping thing so they can get like more influencers over there, and like ideally the exposure they're going to get from influencers is going to be much more worth, Tesla's resources than worry about making a couple $100, a couple $1,000 from rides. So they might do that low pricing, so that way they can get influencers there, which is one of the key reasons why launching in a new area, you can get now you have influencer individuals either that live in that area that are different influencers because they don't live in Austin, Texas, or not willing to fly to Austin, Texas, but you have just like everyday influencers that are not even Tesla influencers, maybe just random technology influencers that, they're not that deep into Tesla that they're willing to travel all the way to Austin, Texas to, test Robotaxi. But if it comes to LA or comes to California, then they're able to, they're able to test that. They're able to test that, experience and showcase that for the world. So more and more people get to see, the Robotaxi functioning and seeing how well it works. But the biggest thing is giving Tesla the exposure of Robotaxi and how it's impacting and how it's growing and all those good things. Okay. Another huge thing that they get is they get the data for testing, because as many Teslas as you see around, there's still probably roads in major cities that have never been driven down by a Tesla. Why? Because somebody down that road doesn't own a Tesla. Maybe it's a particular neighborhood, and nobody in that neighborhood owns a Tesla. So with that being said, even though Tesla's so good at general autonomy, there's not been any real world validation that there's not going to be problems in that area. So as you start to get people using the Robotaxi service, you now have that Robotaxi maybe traveling down different neighborhoods that it wouldn't normally travel down, and you have the ability to collect that data. So you're putting the car in all these different instances that are almost endless, right? There's so many scenarios of I'm going to this destination, that destination, this pickup. There's like almost an infinite amount of pickup locations, almost an infinite amount of drop-off locations, right? And the more you can stress that system and the more you can test that system, the more you can see, what type of issues you have to fix it. So, again, to like re-summarize that little part there, you're now driving in that area to then get first-time sight of that area in real world. So the first-time data for that area. You're then able to capture any intervention data for issues in that area, and then you're able to train against those interventions. So those are all very big, reasons for Tesla, or not very big reasons for Tesla, but those are all very major stimulus for Tesla to launch that Robotaxi in that area, right? So it is very unmeasured, or not unmeasured. My words are not coming out right today. I'm using like all the wrong words, all the wrong places. Kind of hot though. I think I got my AC's off. It is not only important, but it is required that Tesla does these validations like this. The fact they launched Robotaxi with nobody in the car or nobody in the driver's seat is pretty wild. Like, I would have anticipated they would have started off with a driver in the car, and then they would have went from the driver to maybe a passenger, and then they'll go from a passenger to nobody in the car. However, I'm really predicting that they're going to actually move along those steps much quicker than we think. And I think that there's a plausibility that certain riders or that certain vehicles will have riders in the vehicle. The ride The vehicles with the riders in them will be the vehicles that are then going to new geofence areas. So basically, Tesla will assign vehicles with drivers in them to like the new geofence area. So if you have this new geofence area, everybody that's operating inside this geofence area or coming into or out of that geofence area has to be picked up by these geofence cars. So that way they can still get the human intervention to, stop the vehicle from doing something it's not supposed to do. Yet still removing the driver out of the car completely, even the safety rider out of the car, in the areas where they've been operating in that geofence. So the past geofence area or the validated geofence area. After they collect enough data in a particular area, they may say, okay, that area doesn't need any human in the car at all anymore. So once they start having that happening, they could do they could scale in a way that's like, okay, we have 50 cars with riders in them. After we get these 50 cars, or after we get this certain amount of geofence area validated, now we can actually deploy 200 cars to this area, remove the drivers from that area, and move the riders into this area over here. Start doing our validation, confirmation, data collection, and then do that same process. After you get it validated, that area now over here, you're able to pull the riders out, drivers out, expand that area to 200 cars. Again, so now you have 200 and 200 for 400. Take those 50 rider drivers, put them in another area, same process, rinse and repeat, right? So kind of keep growing and expanding out where you have these 50 riders kind of validating certain particular areas and rolling out in that way. Now, even if today Tesla's FSD was so good that it could never wreck, even if it was that good, I still think it's required. You have to go through that validation process. Like, even if somehow they had the data and they already knew that it would never crash, you still need that confirmation step as a safety standpoint that we're going to have this passenger sitting in the car, and then once we validate, we can pull that passenger out. Any new area that they expand into, they do either a driver in the car or a passenger in the car. However, the other thing to keep in mind, they could go from a driver sitting in the car to having nobody in the car. A driver, not a passenger. They can have a driver in the car, remove the driver, and go directly autonomous. And you would say, well, how can you... Well, if in Austin they're already having somebody sit in the passenger seat, why would they not go from a driver to a passenger and then to nobody? Well, the reason for that is because they just need the data. They need the validation, right? So after they collect the data and then they can validate this area is safe enough, we don't need drivers no more. It doesn't matter whether they physically have a driver or a rider in the car. Once they hit that data threshold, they no longer need a rider or driver in the car, and they can immediately go autonomous. And everybody they had employed in that area that can or is willing to, like, go over to the next area, like LA or something like that, or they get pulled off as teleoperators for that area, So, like, that's a big thing, too. Like, I don't think anybody's thinking about that. Like, whenever they're hiring these people, we don't have any information on this yet. So if anybody gets any insight on this information, please drop it down in the comments below, or, like, DM me directly. We can even do, like, it's an anonymous thing, and, I can leave you out of it if you got any, like, behind-the-scenes information. But, we don't know how exactly Tesla's going to structure this. When I say structure this, I mean, what happens when we pull out the safety driver or safety rider? Where does that employee go? Does Tesla just fire them? I would assume the smartest thing to do is make this part of the training step. So anybody who's a driver or a rider, when they get pulled out of the vehicle, they become a teleoperator. Okay, I haven't heard really anybody discuss on this topic yet. But from a training standpoint, in understanding Tesla, understanding FSD, understanding the experience of somebody in a Robotaxi, this is a perfect training for somebody to become a teleoperator. And somebody say, well, like, oh, well then, how are they ever going to get to one-to-one? Well, when they go from a driver to a teleoperator, they'll probably have a time period maybe of one-to-one. Or, well, I mean, they're almost definitely going to have a time period of one-to-one, right? If they go from a driver to a teleoperator, they're going to need some time period. But the time period might be pretty small. And maybe not. Maybe they don't need a time period if the data already shows that it's safe enough. But now they're going to go from driver to teleoperator, and they're going to start learning teleoperation. They're going to start learning, like, the nuances of what they need to do, the controls, you know, what kind of commands they can give it, can't give it, when to intervene, not intervene. And so this is one thing I keep bringing up over and over again. If not already, Tesla needs to have in their software a confidence rating. And if FSD drops below a certain confidence rating, it chimes to a teleoperator, say, hey, check out what's going on around here. I'm a little bit confused. Right? In different percentages is a different, like, severity of or different priority level of teleoperator. So, like, let's say, for instance, if you have, like, 100 teleoperators just sitting around doing nothing, right? Well, okay, they're sitting around doing nothing. They're managing all the highest percentage or the lowest percentage in confidence of all the vehicles. So if let's say almost all the vehicles are running around at 90-95% confidence, and then you have one that drops at like 70% confidence or 60% confidence, then that would chime and immediately become a priority on somebody's screen, and then they would take over. And or if you know, it's constantly bouncing around, you have one at 60, 70, blah, 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 you might go from, like, screen to screen, like, it might flip through cars, like, pretty rapidly, where it's like, you know, oh, this jumped below 65%, okay, what's going on here? Oh, this one jumped below 70%, what's going on here? And so, like, you kind of keep just jumping through the different ones. And this is another thing when it comes to teleoperation, is I don't know how exactly they'll make this work out, but, like, with other AI such as Grok, they could almost have Grok partner with Tesla's FSD and somehow also do an analyzation. Like so what would happen is, like, okay, FSD's confidence level drops below, and then Grok jumps in and says, basically, you know, the FSD's like, is that a cat? And then asks Grok, is it a cat? You know, or I'm not sure what that object is. Can you tell me? And then Grok comes in, analyzes the image that the vehicle's currently seeing, and says, oh, this is what it is. Now, some of those things will only work in, like, slow occurrences, right? Like, either, like, before we take off, or, yeah, whatever, right? It can't be, like, in motion, going 30 miles an hour, going 60 miles an hour. Like, it's probably not going to work like that. But if it's in a parking lot, and it's, like, half confused, like, so these are very good use cases. In a parking lot, confused, the vehicle doesn't know what to do exactly, it can then go to ask a Grok, hey, what should I do in this scenario? So it's not a critical thing. It's not even critical at all, right? So let the AIs almost communicate to each other, and then let the teleoperators handle the more safety-related things. And also let there be a layer of AI on those too, if it can execute in a quick enough manner to help out. But for, like, your things that are going to be, like, crash condition related, that's going to have to be on vehicle, because there's just, like, too much latency in having somebody else tune into the vehicle to see what's going on. So kind of went way off into the weeds on you know, kind of where Tesla might go with FSD or with Robotaxi and everything like that. But This kind of gives you like some more context of how they might scale and how they might move forward with things. Yeah, so hopefully it's insightful. This was like a very much kind of like, I feel like a rambly type of video. I kind of got off the topic and didn't talk too deeply on you know, the expansions themselves, but it's extremely important to have perception in your own mind of where things are going to go, looking at the data, and make your own projections of where you think things will go. Oh, tying back into the marketing thing, you do have to be careful, like if Tesla is just doing LA as a marketing stunt. What makes it different, whether it's a marketing stunt or not, is if they're actually training with that data and it's actually going to make a significant difference, it's actually going to make significant progress, then that will basically be the differentiator between it being a marketing stunt versus a technological step forward. Again, I think it's technological step forward 101%, because no matter what, they're collecting more data, they're driving down roads that they weren't currently driving down. You're gaining riders and drivers in the car that are gaining experience being in the Robotaxi and experience what it's like being an operator of the Robotaxi. Also, a nice caveat, and I think would be very important for Tesla to put an initiative forward, but for Tesla to hire Uber drivers as teleoperators. I think that would be a great thing to do. If not, I think we might see the government step in, and that is one concern that I could see into the future. Like if this thing really starts to scale fast, and 1 year from now, 2 years from now, we're displacing all Uber and Lyft jobs, then if Tesla's kind of being proactive in that and trying to hire Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and any service driver, that's going to help kind of at least cushion how many people are losing jobs from ride hail, because I don't know what the exact number is, but I'm sure that there are hundreds and thousands of people per city that are daily drivers that are just doing Uber as their full-time job. And there's also some people that you wouldn't even think about, but that are using Uber and Lyft and stuff like that to make it by. Make it by meaning it's their second job. It's their like side hustle or whatever. So like their main job just ain't cutting it, and so they have to do Uber and Lyft on the side to like just make a little bit extra money to like sustain. And or people have already stretched past. People always live above their means, and now they're used to making their normal 9-to-5 job money, and they're making their Uber and Lyft money. And if they lose their Uber and Lyft, they're going to be in like a bad situation, even if they are not like in poverty and really struggling. If somebody's making an extra 500, 1,000, 2,000 a month somehow off of hustling and doing Uber and DoorDash as a second job, and you lose that, that could have a major impact on our economy. And if it has too much of an impact on our economy, the government will step in and protect those industries. We've seen it over and over again with every industry in the world. I mean, there's even governmental agencies. I just watched something literally last night that was the dairy industry, about how the government stepped in and they were storing cheese. They was buying cheese from dairy farmers to basically protect the dairy farmers, and they were actually making cheese to store milk. They needed to find a way to store milk. So like, how do we store milk? We make it into cheese. We can then store the cheese longer, has a much longer shelf life, and then we can basically kind of buffer out our milk supply through cheese. And so like that's where like the the whole sector of our government came from, like being a cheese, or called government cheese or whatever. Wild thing. But yeah, it could happen with Robotaxi and stuff like that. So hopefully Tesla does something to try to dampen that, and yeah, maybe there won't be any major problems. Catch y'all on the next one. Peace. Subscribe, like it, do all those things.